who I am proud to say is Cameroonian. So let me introduce Prof. Nyamnjoh to you. Francis B. Nyamnjoh holds a bachelor's and master's from the University of Yaoundé, Cameroon, and a PhD from the University of Leicester, United Kingdom. He joined the University of Cape Town in August 2009 as a professor of social anthropology from the Council of Development and Social Science Research in Africa, that's CODESRIA, where he has served as head of publications from 2003 to 2009. He has taught sociology, anthropology, and communication studies at universities in Cameroon and Botswana previously, and has researched and written extensively on Cameroon and Botswana, where he was awarded Senior Arts Researcher of the Year prize in 2003. In October 2012, he received the University of Cape Town's Excellence Award for exceptional contribution as a professor in the Faculty of Humanities. In 2021, September 2021, he was elected a Fellow of College of Fellows of the University of Cape Town in recognition for his research. Professor Nyamnjoh is a B1 rated professor and researcher by the South African National Research Foundation, NRF, a Fellow of the Cameroon Academy of Science since 2011, a Fellow of the African Academy of Science in 2014. And today, Prof. Nyamnjoh will be speaking, his current research interests include incompleteness, mobility, encounters, belonging, citizenship, and conviviality. Today he will be speaking, his presentation will be given based on a book which was published in 2016. He's building up on that. And as you all know, Bertha did a review of that book, so she'll be making the perfect discussant for this session. Welcome again, Prof.
Thank you very much, Monique, for inviting me and for such a gracious introduction. I felt very excited to be part of this conversation, especially with Bertha, as she recently did a review of the book that I'm going to base this talk about, hashtag Rhodes Must Fall, Nibbling at Resilient Colonialism in South Africa. I wrote this book in 2016. It was published in 2016, shortly after the Rhodes Must Fall movement in South Africa that started from the University of Cape Town and the Feast Must Fall movement. And my reason to write it primarily was, first of all, to document, to provide an archive, but almost also because I wasn't on campus when the movement started and ended. I was on a year-long sabbatical, and I thought my own form of contribution was to provide an archive for it. And when I started researching the book, I increasingly realized that it was important to focus on Rhodes, the person, and more than just what we knew him to be as a rather despicable colonialist who had overly exploited the humans and the human labor and resources in the region. I thought before he was such a prominent obnoxious character in Southern Africa what did we know of him before then? And the more I started reading up on Rhodes, the more I realized how ordinary and how incomplete and very much how much of a Makwerekwere he was. Often our view of Makwerekweres in South Africa seems to be at the level before they have proven themselves. It is at the level of entry, the level where they are still seeking to, looking for a foothold in order to become part and parcel of society in the case of South Africa. And I thought if we were to seek to situate Cecil Rhodes and many others who came and excelled as colonialists before their arrival, we could see them as having a lot in common with Makwerekweres, and indeed a lot in common with everyone else. So I would like to prove this point, to situate this talk around certain key notions that I use increasingly in my research. The notion of incompleteness, and then I will link it up to the notion of mobility or motion, and the idea of what happens when one is mobile is encounters and different types of encounters, and the sort of how the encounters affect us. What do they make of us? And I suggested that we can understand the place of encounters in our lives by looking at the various things that happen, like we as strangers encountering others. And I suggest that we look at it through the template of compositeness of being, and the idea of debt and indebtedness, and of conviviality. So the first thing is incompleteness. Cecil Rhodes, like everyone else, is mobilized or mobilizes themselves or was mobilized to come to South Africa because of their awareness of their incompleteness. And incompleteness in this sense being that we as humans, whether we look at ourselves as individuals or we look at ourselves as part of communities of various kinds, we often are in a state of incompleteness. And then maybe through the need to activate ourselves, to move beyond the incompleteness, our state of incompleteness, we seek mobilities of various kinds. And we could be mobile physically, we could be mobile socially, we could be mobile through all sorts of psychologically and in many other ways. And that if that's the only way in which we can transform our incompleteness into something productive, that comes through mobility. And if we are incomplete and we cannot bring ourselves to move in various ways, our incompleteness is more or less sterile, is more or less unproductive, and it doesn't begin to transform us in any way. And with the case of Cecil Rhodes, he was born, of course, you know, in England, and into a family of, I think, about 8 of them or so. And he was at the age of 17, he was diagnosed with a heart problem, a respiratory problem, and the doctors at the time had thought that he would not live for more than 6 months or so. So in Victorian England, the tropics, or the Africa in general, was the place where they sent people to rejuvenate themselves, to have a second chance, or to defy the ailments, or disease, or all of those things. So he was sent to Africa to almost like to look for greener pastures for health, for his health, and if possible to live longer than he had been credited with life. And when he was about to traveling in those days was challenging, was difficult, just as it is today if you move across borders. One of his aunties, I think called Aunt Sophia, gave him a head start with £2,000 in those days, which was a lot of money. And so he went to Southern Africa, and here in his entrepreneurialness, he established himself as a foremost forager for diamonds and many other riches that the South African soil could provide. So you almost see him as if he is there in England, incomplete, not only in terms of his health, but in terms of his achievements, in terms of his opportunities in life. And then this journey is activated by this journey to Southern Africa, aided by family like the auntie Sophie and like, and he comes and he encounters now. He moves to Africa. He encounters Africans in the Southern African region, interacts with them in a way that is rather exploitative, and a particular type of encounter, 2 strangers meeting, one with ambitions of superiority and imposes such a hierarchy of humanities on those he encounters locally, and is able to exploit them and exploit the labor and exploit the resources for his own sense of fulfillment. Now, that is a particular type of encounter. Not all encounters are of an exploitative nature. Others, as we know, is the currency in Southern Africa, are equally incomplete, like those he encountered. They moved around, not with permanent ambitions of conquest or superiority or lording it over others, but almost with an underlying philosophy of personhood and of being and becoming, which we, those of us familiar with Southern Africa, would sum up as a sort of Ubuntu, which is basically that one is incomplete and through mobilities and encounters with others, one is able to become something else. So one is who one is thanks to others that one encounters through one's mobility. So in other words, it seems as if when one moves as a stranger or as a nobody and encounters others, the relationships that one has activates one to be able to become something, to be able to fulfill oneself. So it 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 is not a relationship of conquest. It's not a relationship of dominance. It's a relationship of debt and indebtedness, in which no one has a monopoly of debt, or no one has a monopoly of being indebted to others. And in other words, it becomes a relationship of mutual enabling. So almost like I often liken it to the relationship we have with our smartphone, where you charge it up by having electricity to enable the battery to be, say, 100%. You also charge it up by putting data and airtime and having wireless facilities. And then you indulge in the process of discharging it, not in a sterile fashion, but through the reaching out to others. So you are discharging it not in the form of wastage, but through in the form of enabling, through communicating with others, you are discharging productively. And others with whom you interact are in turn charged up to the point where they can recharge you. So in a communicative act of reaching out, interacting with others, it's almost as if they provide you the energy to be able to fulfill yourself, just as in your encounters energize them to fulfill themselves. So a sort of Ubuntu-like realities. Our incompleteness is made, we feel it less and less as a hurdle, as a problem, and more as a disposition that enables us to meet others, to interact with them, to empower them as they are empowering us. It's almost like a sort of inclusive inclusive sense of success, of being with others, and not prioritizing zero-sum ambitions of success where winner takes all, but it is in creating space for others to enhance their incompleteness or go beyond their incompleteness to achieve what they ordinarily would not be able to achieve without those relationships with you. So I suggest in my reflections on Cecil Rhodes and what the experience of incompleteness and mobility make possible, is that encounters need not always be one-dimensional of the dominant ambitions to dominate type. We could encounter others by giving and taking in a way that it's almost like the circulation of incompleteness that enriches one another. And it is for that reason that I suggest that it is much more meaningful for us to look at one another as composite beings. When we move around to activate our incompleteness through encounters with others, what this makes of us is that it produces composites. We become almost like a melting pot of the encounters that we've had. We pick and choose from the encounters the sort of things that would enhance us, will enable us in many ways to fulfill certain desires, but never in a way that kills the other off or denies the other the opportunities to fulfill themselves as well. So it's a listening type of encounter. It is an encounter that empowers, that blends in with who you are and doesn't empty you out of who you are. It enriches, it enhances who you are. So we become composites. And that compositeness means that we normally should not speak of identities and identifications in absolute terms. We should see them more as an open-ended, constantly enriching repertoire that we draw on for sustenance in various ways. We cannot speak, just as we cannot speak about our smartphones in absolute terms that we are fully charged all the time. A phone that is fully charged all the time can be a very idle phone in a way, because if you're fully charged, it means that you are not discharging meaningfully or productively into the relationships that you are meant to operate with. And therefore, if you don't discharge onto others in these terms of this smartphone, you cannot in turn be charged, because it's almost like you live in splendid isolation, and therefore absolutes are only possible in splendid isolation. Absolute in terms of power, absolute in terms of possessions, absolute in terms of status can only be possible in splendid isolation, which basically means the death of society, the death of others, the death of togetherness of all kinds, and the death of Ubuntu. So a truly rich person who wants to count themselves as a billionaire eternally is one who has no Ubuntu, one who is who only thrives through eating others up and annihilating them, denying them the life chances that make them possible, and therefore, in many ways, a very useless sort of existence. So those are the arguments I make. And I argue that if we take on board the idea of compositeness of being and the idea that nobody has a monopoly of debt, then the only form of existence that really makes sense to us as mobile incompleteness is one of conviviality. An existence of conviviality is therefore one that presupposes incompleteness as a permanence, incompleteness as a universal, and also presupposes mobility as a permanence, mobility as a universal. And in our mobility, we encounter others who are strangers just as we are strangers to them, and we familiarize with them, which means we take the stranger in. And once we take the stranger in, the stranger becomes a familiar part of you. And if you leave the stranger out and freezes them out, you also freeze them as if the stranger is permanently the other, external to you. And then you start pontificating in a very disparaging way vis-a-vis the stranger, almost as if someone had a monopoly of strangeness. So the idea of reaching, encountering others and becoming composite is that we are always taking in the unfamiliar and at the same time sharing what we are familiar with the outside. It's this movement that creates, is constantly in the process of digesting the stranger and making the stranger part and parcel of who one is. And finally, I suggest that if we were to shape our scholarship around this idea of the mobile incompletenesses and encounters, it will become what we could call convivial scholarship. A convivial scholarship is therefore a scholarship that takes incompleteness seriously, provides for it as a permanence, not something negative, but something to be embraced and to be celebrated and to be used as a lens through which we see and factor in the world. So, for example, convivial scholarship that takes incompleteness seriously cannot focus analysis purely on race, as if other attributes did not exist. But often every analysis that you have, for example, at play, if race is a factor, you bring it in. If geography and ethnicity are factors, if class, gender, sexuality, generational relationships are factors, you bring them in. So convivial scholarship is therefore scholarship that allows us or that pushes us to take the complexities and nuances of any reality or any situation seriously. And it is open, it's always open-ended in the sense that it is more about it is scholarship that doesn't rest on its laurels or settle into the predictable idea that we have found the answers and therefore we have solved the problem. Because you know, with each research situation, every time you think you have solved a hypothesis, it opens the door up to new forms of questioning. So convivial scholarship is one that allows for always new and exciting, new and critical ways of questioning and looking at reality from different vantage points, because it's scholarship about the mobility of incompleteness. And if incompleteness is always mobile and positioning itself through different types of relationships, you have to develop the capacity to be able to observe and describe or explain that phenomenon, that mobile, incessantly mobile incompleteness from different vantage points. And it means that it is scholarship where, even though it is based on disciplines, as a starting point, it is not confined to disciplines. It is therefore a scholarship that invites disciplines into all types of conversations with kindred disciplines, with those who are not within the academy, and within the academy and outside of the academy, with those whom at face value may not consider as scholars and therefore unlikely conversation partners with you. It is a type of scholarship that invites us to assume a certain humility to knowledge production, to meaning making, and to the assumptions that underpin these processes. And I think it is along those lines that I thought I should pay tribute to this student movements around Rhodes Must Fall and Fees Must Fall. They pushed me to see the place of incompleteness at the place of mobility, encounters, compositeness of being, debt and indebtedness and conviviality in who we are as humans, how we relate to one another and how we relate to the environments in which we find ourselves, and the need for humility in how we frame and study and seek to understand the unfoldings in life, in their complexities and nuance. And I would like to conclude by sharing with you a story, very quickly, a story that exemplifies all of this. And it is a story from, since we are talking, we often challenge ourselves as Africans to in the decolonial, in our decoloniality conversations, we are challenged to look for examples on the continent or amongst Africans in their mobility that could point us into another epistemic system of doing what we do. I think this particular story helps me a lot in that regard, and it is a story from Amos Tutuola, who died in 1997, but after leaving us with a very rich archive of stories that he had written and published, mostly published by this London-based publisher, Faber and Faber. The story is from his very first book, The Palm Wine Drinker. And in this story, there is an incomplete, there are lots of almost everything, his books are about incompleteness. And the universe proliferates with incompletenesses of various kinds. But this particular story is about someone who once was human, but who has since died and has since decayed. And the only thing left, as archaeologists tend to show us when they excavate a place that was once inhabited by humans, is the skull. So this particular skull lives in a community of skulls. And in the community of skulls, as incomplete as they are, just reduced to barest minimum of life as skulls, they are very comfortable in their little circle, in their little bubble, in their little echo chamber or silo, until something from a bigger community with people who are more full-bodied, nonetheless incomplete in their own ways. And this particular story is about a full-bodied, beautiful woman who is not satisfied with all the suitors that come her way, which basically means that most of the men that come to seek her hand in marriage, although they are equally full-bodied and very handsome, in her eyes, they are incomplete. They have something lacking. And so this skull hears this story about this impossible, beautiful woman who turns down every possible suitor that comes her way. And the skull looks at himself and decides that an able-bodied beautiful woman who turns down every other able-bodied suitor must want as a husband a man who is out of this world. So he looks at himself as incomplete as he is and says, I am that person. And so he sets out on a mission to acquire this lady as a bride, even though she's turning down people who are much more complete than him. But he also knows, having been human already in the past, he knows that humans are led by appearances, that humans like to keep up appearances. So he also decides to keep up appearance by undertaking to borrow body parts from those who have them and to borrow the best, since he has the money to pay, almost like you hire a car from and you want to get the best of it. So he borrows this, he undertakes this journey of borrowing body parts to enhance himself in order to appear to be what he isn't, to appear in a way that humans can identify him, since they like to judge by appearances. And he undertakes this journey to reactivate his wasted humanity through borrowings. And he now becomes, because he could pay for it, he borrows the best body parts and so on. And he turns out to be the most handsome man ever. And Amos Tutuola refers to him as the complete gentleman. And he was really complete. And Amos, I don't want to belabor the point, but, and so he borrows also other gears, like he borrows a horse and rides into the village as the complete gentleman. And as soon as this lady sets eyes on him, she can judge him from appearances, sensory perception. She says, "You are the Mr. Right that I've always wanted." And so it goes on, and he gets her hand in marriage, and then she follows him, and because he takes his debt seriously. He doesn't want to be a propped up man, to be complete on the resources of others, to appear to be who he isn't. He decides to return the body parts he had borrowed and pay for them. So he deactivates himself into the incomplete form as a skull that he was, to make the point. And Amos Tutuola uses him to make that point for us. And I think once you do that, you understand the importance of humility in who we are, so that we never claim to be self-made persons in exclusionary terms, but that we are who we are thanks to relationships with others. I think I will stop there and allow for Bertha to comment on any other discussion that we may have, as I may have overspoken. Thank you.
Thank you again, Prof. Nyamnjoh. Thank you. That was very engaging. I particularly liked the reference to the palm wine drinker because I love that book. So inviting Bertha to begin her response, and then if you have questions or comments, there is a comment for you in the chat from Fenella, which I will read later on. Sir,
thank you very much, Monique, and thank you so much, Prof, for that presentation. So I think what I'll do is I'll first give out a summary of what you have said based on the book and other publication of which you spoke about, conviviality, and yeah, and then I'll pose some questions and wait for others to come and comment. So thank you again for that very fascinating talk. I think at some point we can all relate to what you are saying, either directly to the kind of research that we do individually, or the talk and presentation like this from different platforms. When scholars argue for the broader role of education, higher education, and issues of humility. So to give it some sort of a summary of what Prof Nyamnjoh was saying, you define conviviality as a recognition and provision for the fact or reality of being incomplete. And so conviviality invites us to celebrate and preserve incompetence and mitigate the delusion of magnificence that comes with the ambition and claim of competence. So Prof. Nyamnjoh argues that conviviality implies a sense of accommodating togetherness beyond tolerance, where the individual can express themselves in a hospital sense. So when you're talking about this, and I think you mentioned this in your presentation, it made me think of Ujamaa ideas, Ubuntu ideas, as you have mentioned, and the discussion towards citizenship and relation. I was trying to relate this in higher education context and the contribution of universities towards Ubuntu and Ujamaa. And so when I was reading the article on conviviality, there's a section where you mentioned that universities are not as convivial in practice as one would expect. And I think we'd all agree to this, especially during the current globalized and knowledge economy era. And I think this is even why most of scholars draw and argue for citizenship or Ubuntu or Ujamaa, because as you said, universities are not as convivial in practice as one would expect. So same thing when I was reading this article, Prof. Nyamnjoh used few examples to explain about some of the few spaces in favor to the emergence of conviviality in the society, including the public transport, in which he spoke about the relationship between drivers and passengers. And he also used another example of religious, when he gave an example of this church in Cape Town, the Bay Community Church in Cape Town, which accommodates foreigners and local communities in South Africa, and argue that this church kind of make immigrants worship and feel home away from home. So he used those kind of examples to explain some of the spaces that are in favor to the emergence of conviviality. So in summary, Prof. Nyamnjoh explains a convivial scholarship, and I think he has explained in his presentation, as one which does not seek to define or confine Africans into a particular territories or geographies, or particular ratios, or any other ethnic categories, let's say classes, gender, religion, or whatever, in any other identity maker. But convivial scholarship confronts and humbles the challenges of over-prescription and over-standardization. So based on this, in that article where we're talking about conviviality, I think there's a section where you mentioned that talking about conviviality, it only there's no final answers, or there's no final answers with convivial scholarship, but there's only permanent questions and questions. So I was left in between to either agree or disagree with you. So one of my questions will be, I would like to ask you to kind of explain to that, why exactly did you thought with convivial discussion, there's no final answer, but we'll keep on asking ourselves questions and questions. And another thing, I'm trying to imagine or think universities as convivial spaces in relation to African cultures. I was trying to think what do you think could be the implication of African culture, especially when, as a young person, you're supposed to be submissive to your elder? You don't have to question your elders or raise a question or anything towards your elder. Now, I was trying to, I don't know if I'm rephrasing my question clear, but I was just wondering, what do you think could be the implication when we argue for convivial scholarship, especially in African context with our African culture? And then my last question is also out of curiosity, knowing that you have done some work in Cameroon, and I know one of the divisions that exist in Cameroon is the language between Anglophone and Francophone. So I was also wondering how or what convivial scholarship could be in Cameroonian context. So to end this, I would just like to mention that I think you made a good point in the book when you said it was more like a reminder to all of us that we need to choose better future by including a fellow, a sister, a brother, or one of us in our shopping basket as Africans. It's more of Ubuntu, being there for each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bertha. I will give some time, perhaps Prof wants to respond to that. I'll give some time to introduce.
Very, very quickly, just to say, Bertha has raised very interesting points, which I believe we can keep the discussion between ourselves going for long. I will the one about the elders and how to question them is that if you've ever been with a toddler and how they ask, the curiosity is without limit, and if they ask for questions, they ask you questions, you give answers that they don't quite think amount to the answers that make sense. They come back with the same question in a way that makes you appear you have to sit up, or you get embarrassed. So in a way, ways of questioning also means that we can't settle for platitudes. We cannot settle for standardized answers that do not quite make sense. For example, when they say, where do children come from? Like a child would ask you, and then you say they drop from heaven or something like that. So in a way, the questionings, the intergenerational opportunities, the new generations have new ways of learning, like children today have all this exposure to the internet, the children's programs on televisions and radios, and new possibilities of learning that we didn't have in the past. So every outgoing generation must think very carefully what to transmit and how seriously they do the transmission if they want to be taken seriously, if they don't want to be forgotten by the incoming generation. I don't think that our cultures are so rigid and static that they cannot be transformed. You just need to see intergenerationally how things. The outgoing generation is always complaining that in our days. We did things differently. So which tells you this idea of cultures, even as they are useful, are incomplete, and they transform through mobilities and encounters with innovations and with creativities. And in innovation, the creativity and innovation might be internal within those cultures, intergenerational, just as it might be encountering others outside of the given cultures. So the excitement of mobility is that nothing is ever the same in a way that that is sterile. If you choose to be the same, it's because it is productive sameness. You're constantly enriching yourselves. And the language problem in Cameroon, it's real, but the conviviality is actually about these different languages coming together in a very creative way. I sometimes dabble into writing novels, and one of my novels, just a quick example, is The Travail of Dieudonné, and in it you have the mixing of French and English as languages, and in indigenous languages of various kinds coming together in a way that reflects the richness of that society. So I don't write in one language, even if I'm telling the story mainly in English. You have insertions here and there of French and English and indigenous languages, just as people would normally speak. If you speak Zulu or you speak any of the South African languages, you see interjections of English words here and there and so on. And that is the conviviality par excellence. Yes, I will send you something I did recently on being and becoming African as a permanent work in progress, inspirations from Chinua Achebe's proverbs. So you can see how some of these things are explored in that text, both in terms of questioning of elders by younger generations who produce their own art and are not going to imbibe the sense from their parents that theirs was the pinnacle of achievement in terms of cultures and nothing else. They subvert it and they redefine it, but they don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, culturally speaking. Here, I will send you that after this. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Please.
Thank you.
I have comment from Fenella, just to read what she says, in case you haven't seen it. She said it was an interesting analogy you made with regards to the smartphone being an enabling inclusive mechanism. Is there anyone else that has any questions?
And if you want, I've written a paper on the smartphone. It's called ICTs as Juju in Africa. I can send it to you for circulation in the group, please.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. And Juju, if you don't know, Melanie has a question. Prof. Walker has a question for you. Please go ahead.
Thanks very much, Monique. Professor Nyamnjoh, that was the most amazing presentation. I thought it was incredibly rich. There's a huge amount there to think about and to go away and read about. So I don't claim to have grasped it all or to have internalized or absorbed it all, beyond a sense of that there's something so exciting here to go away and to look at more closely, especially given our interests in human development. I've got quite a broad question, just for some thoughts that you might have on it. So you've spoken about convivial scholarship as one element, I guess, of what a university might look like. I'd be interested from your point of view of what you think the University of Mobile Incompleteness would look like for diverse undergraduate students. What might be some of its key elements, and how do we make it together? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's when I talk about convivial scholarship, I immediately insert into it that it's an idea to develop further, and that my pronouncement on it doesn't make of me an expert at it, but it already has its broad parameters around which we could contemplate it. And these parameters I have highlighted very broadly in terms of incompleteness is a key pillar of it. Mobility is another key pillar. Not always mobility in terms of, in fact, let's start incompleteness, a key pillar, not only incomplete individuals or incomplete disciplines or incomplete faculties, or the fact that the university itself is not the pinnacle of knowledge and all-knowing in our ivory towers, but that you need conversations across the academy and outside with stakeholders outside of the academy. It's a very useful one. And I think at the University of the Free State, there are certain programs that do exactly that. Some degree programs, I remember Liz Lange inviting us, myself and two other colleagues to come and evaluate the undergraduate humanities and social science programs there. And there was an element of reaching out and in conversation with the state structures outside of the universities for how to shape the program so civil servants and others could benefit more from what is given. It is sort of conversations outside of the academy. So you cannot find an all-knowing academy that says we have all the answers, you have the problems. And in that sense, it will not be productive of a convivial scholarship. So it's about a certain fluidity between the boundaries of the university, internal boundaries, as well as institutions with the outside world, and that flexible mobilities between those borders, those frontiers. And within the discipline, convivial scholarship would take the form of having our disciplines and its canons and its rules of engagement, but always also coming when you're going through the corridors to deliver your course. You're listening to the sociologists speaking, to linguists there, to that, to historians, and you don't say, okay, I'm a geographer, let me close my ears completely. You may hear something that resonates or that begins to trigger something. I must say, okay, what combinations could we have with geographers in our degree program, even if only in terms of co-supervision of our students? So you have a provision for supervision where you have somebody at the heartland well anchored in the discipline. But because this topic is such that excites interest and the insights from elsewhere, you invite a co-supervisor from elsewhere. In anthropology, where I belong, convivial scholarship would take the form of our senses are our main instrument for gathering data when we are in the field. Sense of sight, all our five senses, and it is difficult for one human being to have all of those senses 100% right. Some people don't quite hear, they can hear only 60%, some can smell 40%, others can smell or can touch and feel differently. So how do we constitute ourselves if we're doing research and we have to maximize what the senses bring home to us in a way that we say we are going to have a team of 5, even if it requires going to biological sciences and medical sciences to measure our senses in terms of perfection. The person who hears the best, the person who sees the furthest, the person who can smell very well, and we have a team of 5 of well-equipped, each constituting one sense in which they are the most equipped. Then we can go to the field, and instead of going always as lone rangers, which we anthropologists have the habit of doing, and thinking that you are complete as researchers. So it's along those lines. So we could have a long conversation on that. Again, I have a paper or two on convivial scholarship, decolonizing the university and decolonizing the academy, which I can send after this to Monique to share with you. Thank you. Yeah.
ask that we stick to time since he had a meeting at 1 p.m. And I think we're just in time with 1 minute left to 1. I want to thank you again, Prof, for making it and for sharing such with us. I will pass on the articles you promised to share with the rest of the group. Thank you everyone for making it today. And thank you, Bertha, for engaging in this way. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I will send the papers by 2 p.m. today after my meeting. Thank you. Okay.
Until next time.
Have a nice day.